Hey, what's going on, guys? I know it's a day late, but we have to talk about this Jamal Adams extension. Now, it's a 4-year, $70 million deal that peaks at 4 years, $72 million. So for right now, I'm just going to consider it 4 years, $70 million, which is $17.5 million a year, which I think is almost $2 million, if not more than $2 million more, the next highest paid safety in terms of average annual salary, which is Justin Simmons. He got that record-setting deal in March. Now Jamal Adams absolutely crushes it. But if he does get that $72 million, then Jamal Adams is in effect making $18 million a year, which is exactly what Bobby Wagner, his all-pro teammate, is making. So we're at a point now where the top safeties can be paid like the top linebackers, which is good for the safeties because they've been one of the most underpaid positions in football in recent times. And they've had a lot of jumps, obviously, in terms of the record-setting deals where it's guys like Kevin Byard, Eddie Jackson, Budda Baker, Justin Simmons, and now, of course, Jamal Adams. Now, was he worth all this money, though? This is the legitimate question. Was Jamal Adams, coming off the worst year of his career, worth this much money? Now, he only played in 12 games this past year. He had everything from torn labrum. I think he had a separated shoulder. He had a groin injury that missed time with. He had surgery on one of his fingers. I think there was a small fracture on one of his fingers. He had surgery after the season. So he was going through a ton of injuries. So you have to understand when you're looking at his lackluster production, he was dealing with a lot of issues this past year. He had 9.5 sacks. He had no interceptions. He only has 2 interceptions for his career so far. He's never been dominant in coverage, but he's always been good enough in coverage that, his lackluster skills at times never mattered because he was good enough in coverage that everything else could shine through. That always happened in New York. He was good enough in coverage, not elite in coverage. I said lackluster earlier. That was probably incorrect. He was never elite in coverage, but he was still a high-level safety in coverage. We did not see that this past year, and part of the reason was because of how Seattle used him. He was in the box so much. He was blitzing so often. Of course, he set a record for sacks by defensive back this past year, at least in a single season. And Seattle used him a little bit all over the place, which I think contributed to his problems. First off, he got there on short notice because of the trade in the offseason. Then he deals with all the injuries. He misses some significant time early in the year. And Seattle's just throwing him all over the place. I think a more defined role would help him out. He's a good Swiss Army knife. He's not on the same level as someone like a Tyrann Mathieu, per se, in my opinion, because Mathieu has more pure coverage skills than someone like Jamal Adams, in my opinion, which kind of shakes things up a little bit. Granted, Adams is more of a better as a linebacker than someone like Tyrann Mathieu because Adams packs a bit more of a punch. But was he worth the $17.5 to $18 million a year? I would say yes, because of everything he can do. He can move him all around. He's basically a linebacker / safety hybrid in Seattle, so he can play a bunch of roles. He can play in the box. If you need to move him deep, you can do that. I still am a firm believer that the Jamal Adams we saw in 2018, I believe, is probably the true Jamal Adams. 2019, he was the first team All-Pro. Best year of his career. This past year, technically the worst year of his career, despite the 9.5 sacks. What's the truth? Somewhere in the middle. That 2018 season where he was still, by the way, a second team All-Pro, still one of the 5 best safeties in the NFL, that I think is the true Jamal Adams we'll see. The guy who maybe will not be the best safety in the league every year, but he's certainly not going to be anywhere near close to what he was this past season. He's going to be much better than that going forward in Seattle. And if he struggles with the Seahawks long term, I think you really have to look at the coaching staff and the role they designed for him in that defense. Because he was fine in New York, working with less talent in New York than what he had in Seattle this past year, and he was absolutely fine. So looking based off that, I just think that we have to look at his role in Seattle. If he fails this coming year or struggles this coming year, this past season, I'm kind of throwing it away a little bit for him. Yes, you do have to take everything into account. But at the same time, like I said, he was injured all year long. He was never 100%, and he was adjusting to a role that was kind of different when he was doing in New York. Now, granted, New York moved him around quite a bit as well, but in Seattle, it was just a much more diverse set. Obviously, he's blitzing quite a lot more. We'll see how it all plays out. I think Jamal Adams was worth the money, but if you had to ask me who's the best safety in the NFL right now, if I said, well, just based purely on talent, I would say Derwin James. But Derwin James has not been healthy for basically 2 years at this point. So that's kind of unfortunate. Hopefully he stays healthy all year this year. I really hope he stays healthy because Derwin James to me is the best safety when fully fit. But Derwin James, Micah Fitzpatrick's up there, Justin Simmons is up there, Jesse Bates was the best safety in the NFL this past year, even if the Associated Press didn't gave him the second team All-Pro selection. So you got Bates, Minka, Derwin James, Justin Simmons, Jamal Adams. Those are the 5 to me that are up there in the conversation right now. And I think that Adams, based on this past year, probably belongs 5th, maybe 6th in the whole safety conversation. But again, he just got paid. Seattle kind of cornered themselves into that deal when they gave the Jets 2 first-round picks and a 3rd-round pick and Bradley McDougall. They kind of cornered themselves into having to eventually sign Adams to a massive extension, the same way the Houston Texans did with Larry Tunsil. Sorry, my camera's shaking right now. I got it in my left hand. I'm going to put it back to my right. But they kind of cornered themselves into making that deal. And we knew Adams was going to set the record at some point, whether it was Seattle or not. He was going to set a record with the team. He comes out and it's a massive deal. It's going to have huge implications moving forward. And I do think for Seattle it makes sense because of how many different roles Adams is going to play on the defense and just how depleted that defense is right now. I mean, it's Bobby Wagner. They haven't brought KJ Wright back yet, which doesn't make any sense to me at all. But you got Bobby Wagner out front. No more Jeremy Reed. No more Frank Clark. So no more of those guys who were really helpful to you towards the end of the end of the 2010s. No more KJ Wright, as I already said. No more Shaquille Griffin in the secondary. You've got Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams, which is a good safety combo, but it doesn't help you out too much if your cornerbacks just don't hold up. So we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, this is a team that really needs Jamal Adams to do a lot of different things for them. And if it's playing linebacker, fine. If it's rushing the passer, fine. If it's playing box safety or deep safety role, that's fine too. I think he can do all of that. It's just a question of, are they going to put him in a position to succeed? I think he will be one of the top 5 safeties in the NFL this year. I think he'll continue to be one of the 50 or 60 best players in the NFL. It just comes down to, we'll see how put him in a position to where he's not, not Kyle Scattershot, not everywhere to the point that he just can't get a rhythm going. Will he ever have terrific interception numbers? No, he's not going to. He's not that kind of player. But I don't think his career will go the same way as Landon Collins, where Landon Collins was a box safety, was a defensive player of the candidate one year, ends up in Washington and just kind of fades into the background. I don't think that's going to happen to Jamal Adams. I really don't. We just have to wait and see how it plays out. I am still optimistic that Jamal Adams will work out in Seattle long term, and hopefully this deal doesn't crush Seattle's cap.